On a Tuesday morning in February of 1983, a loan officer named Gerald Wynn sat at his desk at the Pottawatomie County Savings Bank and started making phone calls. His list had 14 names on it. 14 farmers whose operating loans were being called. The message was brutal. Pay in full within 90 days or the bank seizes the farm. Gerald worked down the list, listening to men go quiet, then panicked, then absolutely desperate. But when he reached the 14th name, everything changed. He called Russell Millard, a farmer with 280 acres south of Neola, and delivered the terrible news. Russell did not panic, he did not beg. Instead, his voice was perfectly calm when he told the loan officer to open his file and read the fine print on page 6 out loud. He told Gerald to read the exact words of the acceleration clause because that clause was going to prove that the bank could not touch a single inch of his land. And as the loan officer read the words, he realized he had just picked a fight with the only man in the county who was ready for him. Let me tell you about Russell Millard, because the reason he knew exactly what that contract said goes back 26 years to a kitchen table in 1957, where his father lost absolutely everything. Russell was born in 1941, the only son of Clarence Millard. Clarence farmed 280 acres of good Iowa ground, and he was a careful man in every way except one. He never read contracts. In his world, a handshake was a binding agreement, and a contract was just that same handshake written down on paper. He trusted his neighbors, and he trusted his banker, a man he had played baseball with in high school. So when Clarence took out an $8,000 operating loan in 1955 to buy seed and fertilizer, he just signed exactly where the banker pointed. He never bothered to read the fine print. He never read the hidden clause on page 6 that gave the bank the right to call the full balance with 30 days notice for any reason the bank deems necessary. Those 3 words. For any reason. Not for missing a payment, not for failing to farm properly, just for any reason at all. For 2 years, everything was fine. Clarence made all of his payments exactly on time. But then a larger corporate bank out of Omaha bought the local branch. The new owners looked at the dropping land values and decided they wanted more collateral. When Clarence could not provide it, they activated that hidden clause on page 6 and demanded the entire $8,000 immediately. Clarence could not pay. He went to his friend, the banker, and pleaded for mercy, but the banker simply told him that the Omaha executives were making the rules now and the contract allowed it. Clarence Millard was forced to sell 120 acres of prime farmland at 60 cents on the dollar just to satisfy a loan he had never defaulted on. It broke him completely. He died a few years later, looking 20 years older than he was, his pride and his health destroyed by a piece of paper. Russell was 16 years old the day his father came home defeated. That night, after his parents went to sleep, Russell walked into the dark kitchen and found the loan document sitting on the table. He sat down and read every single page. He read every paragraph and every hidden clause. He barely understood the legal language, but he understood enough to know that his father had signed away his life without even realizing it. Sitting in that quiet kitchen, the 16-year-old boy made a solemn vow that would dictate the rest of his life. He swore he would never sign a document he did not fully understand, and he would never allow 3 words buried on page 6 to destroy him the way they had destroyed his father. Let me tell you about how Russell became the most annoying borrower in Pottawatomie County, because that reputation is the entire reason this story exists. Russell took over the remaining 160 acres from his father in 1963. He farmed it with the Farmall 560 his father had bought back in 1958, which was the only piece of equipment that had not been sold to cover the bank loan. He ran the operation exactly the way his father had, planting corn and soybeans, keeping his costs incredibly low and saving money after every single harvest. But Russell did one crucial thing entirely differently than his father. Whenever he signed anything, whether it was a land lease, a seed contract, an equipment agreement, or an insurance policy, he read every single word. He did not just skim the document. He read it with a heavy dictionary sitting beside him to translate the legal terms and a red pen in his hand to cross out the parts he did not accept. The first time Russell took out an operating loan in 1965, he sat in the Pottawatomie County Savings Bank for 3.5 solid hours. The loan officer, a man named Dennis Creel, had never had a farmer spend more than 20 minutes on a loan closing. Most men just shook hands and signed exactly where the bank placed the colored tabs. But Russell read every page and requested major changes to the standard provisions. He found the dreaded acceleration clause, the exact same hidden trap that had destroyed his father, which gave the bank the right to demand full payment for any reason they deemed necessary. Russell flatly refused to sign it. He pushed the paper back across the desk and demanded the language be changed to state that the loan could only be called if he specifically defaulted on his scheduled payments. Dennis Creel stared at him in absolute disbelief. Russell was a 24-year-old kid farming a modest piece of ground with a used tractor, and he was trying to rewrite a standard bank contract. It was considered absurd behavior. Farmers did not negotiate loan terms, they just signed what the bank put in front of them. But Russell stood his ground and threatened to walk out. Because his financial history was spotless, the bank president eventually caved and approved the change. It took 3.5 hours to close a simple $6,000 loan. Dennis Creel complained about it at the local diner that evening, and by the end of the week, everyone in the county knew that Russell Millard was a paranoid, difficult, and obsessive man. The local John Deere dealer in Council Bluffs, a wealthy salesman named Pete Sadler, delivered the ultimate insult at the feed store. Pete loudly mocked Russell to a crowd of laughing farmers, declaring that Russell reads the fine print the way other men read the Bible, which is religiously, obsessively, and without understanding why normal people do not waste their time doing it. The whole county laughed at the quiet farmer. They thought he was a paranoid fool. They happily signed their own massive loan contracts with their eyes closed, taking on dangerous debt to buy shiny new equipment while mocking the only man in the county who actually knew what he was signing. Now, let me tell you about February of 1983, because that is when the laughter finally stopped and the reading paid off. You know what the farm crisis did to the Midwest? Interest rates climbed above 18%. Corn prices plummeted below $2 a bushel. Land values were instantly cut in half. The Pottawatomie County Savings Bank, like every rural bank in Iowa, was drowning in bad loans. Their farm portfolio was completely underwater. The examiners from Omaha were threatening action. So the bank board made a cold and calculated decision. They decided that mercy was no longer affordable. They decided to call every operating loan where the collateral had declined below the required threshold. They decided to use the acceleration clause that gave them the right to demand full payment for any reason they deemed necessary. That Tuesday morning, Gerald Wynn made 14 phone calls. 13 of those farmers had blindly signed the standard contract. 13 of those men had sat in the loan officer's office, signed exactly where the colored tabs were placed, shook hands, and left without ever reading page 6. When the bank demanded full payment within 90 days, those 13 families were completely destroyed. Some of them had been on their land for 3 generations. But the acceleration clause gave the bank the absolute right, and the bank ruthlessly exercised it. The foreclosure auctions started happening one after another. The same grim crowds gathered to watch equipment and land sold for pennies on the dollar. The men who had laughed at Russell Millard for bringing a dictionary to the bank were now weeping as they handed over the keys to their farms. And it was not just the farmers who lost everything. Pete Sadler, the arrogant John Deere dealer who had mocked Russell so loudly at the feed store, found himself facing his own disaster. Half of his customer base was being foreclosed. The shiny new machines he had sold on credit were being repossessed and stacked on his lot. But Pete had an even bigger problem. He had signed his dealership agreement with John Deere without reading the fine print. The contract contained a clause that allowed the manufacturer to pull his franchise with 60 days' notice for underperformance. When the crisis hit, the corporate office defined underperformance however they wanted. Pete lost his entire business because he did not read page 12 of his own franchise agreement. He was forced to declare bankruptcy, close his doors, and take a miserable job selling life insurance in Omaha. While the entire county was drowning in debt and despair, Russell Millard kept working his land. His loan stayed perfectly in place with the exact same terms, the exact same fixed rate, and the exact same restricted acceleration clause. He made his scheduled payments on time every single year through the brutal crisis, the exact same way he had made them before the crisis began. The bank could not touch him, not because he was incredibly wealthy and not because he was extraordinarily lucky. The bank could not touch him because he was the only man in the county who had actually read the contract. Let me tell you about the meeting at the bank, because it happened 3 days after the phone call, and it was the most important hour of Russell Millard's life. Russell drove to Council Bluffs on a Friday, bringing one thing with him. He carried a manila folder containing his original loan contract, every renewal, and every piece of correspondence the bank had ever sent him. It was 18 years of paperwork, organized by date, and annotated in his own handwriting. The bank president was Carl Edberg, who had inherited the massive loan portfolio and the crisis eating it alive. Gerald Wynn, the loan officer, was there, along with the bank's attorney and Dennis Creel, the man who had closed Russell's original loan back in 1965. Carl Edberg began by stating that there was some disagreement about the terms. Russell calmly replied that there was absolutely no disagreement. He opened his folder, removed the original 1965 document, turned to page 6, and laid it flat on the table. The acceleration clause was highlighted in yellow. Russell explained that his clause stated the bank may call the loan only in the event of borrower default on scheduled payments. He pointed out that he had never missed a single payment in 18 years. He turned to the attorney and asked if there had been a default. The attorney admitted that Russell's payments were perfectly current. Russell then declared that the bank had no right to call his loan. Dennis Creel was forced to swallow hard and admit he had approved this exact modification 18 years ago because Russell refused to sign otherwise. The attorney read the original contract and the renewals. He looked at Carl Edberg and delivered the bad news. The contract was absolutely clear, and without a default, they could not call the loan. Carl Edberg leaned back in his chair and asked Russell why a 24-year-old kid negotiated this specific clause and meticulously maintained these records for 18 years. Russell told him the brutal truth. He explained that in 1957, his father had lost 120 acres to this exact bank. His father never missed a payment, but the bank called his loan under a hidden clause that said for any reason. His father had not known the clause existed because he trusted the banker and never read the contract. Russell had read it when he was 16 and decided he would never give a bank the right to take his land for any reason other than his own failure. Carl Edberg realized he could not touch a single inch of Russell's farm. The ultimate revenge came shortly after. By 1986, Russell had accumulated $67,000 in cash savings. The arrogant men who mocked him were completely destroyed. Pete Sadler lost his entire business to bankruptcy simply because he never read page 12 of his own franchise agreement. Meanwhile, Russell walked into a foreclosure auction and bought back the exact 120 acres his father had lost for $380 an acre. He paid $45,600 in pure cash to the very bank that tried to destroy his family. He signed the deed right inside Carl Edberg's office while the bank president watched in absolute silence. The man who read the fine print was now buying the wreckage that the fine print had created.
Let me ask you something, and take your time with this one. Have you actually read your contracts? Not glanced at them, not skimmed the summary, not trusted the man across the desk who says everything is standard. 13 farmers signed the standard contract, and 13 farmers trusted the bank. 9 of them lost their farms, not because they were bad farmers, but because they did not read page 6. One farmer read the fine print, one farmer negotiated his clause, and when the bank came, that one farmer was the one smiling. The contract does not care if you read it. What the contract says is whatever you agreed to when you signed it, whether you understood it or not. The law does not protect the trusting, it protects the literate. Clarence Millard trusted, but Russell Millard read, and the difference was 120 acres and a lifetime of sleeping soundly.
Now, before we finish, I want to share a small secret with you. While the careful genius and the stubborn spirit of this tale beat in the heart of every rural American town, the specific names and events like Russell and his 18-year-old manila folder are a carefully crafted legend. It is a fictional tribute dedicated to the countless quiet farmers across this country who read the fine print when everyone else is blindly signing their lives away. If you believe in the undeniable genius of the American farmer and the value of reading the fine print, please hit that like button and subscribe to The Farm Legacy. Go down to the comments right now and tell me if you have ever been tricked by signing a contract without reading it properly. Until next time, always remember that the best investment you can ever make is simply understanding exactly what you are signing.